for all of you who are signed in on, I'm Bob Wells. I'm the president of the Audubon Society of Omaha. And tonight we are doing our first Zoom general education meeting. And the person who gets to blaze a path here into this is somebody that I've known for quite a while. I was just looking at her CV and I realized I didn't know her for her whole time out at Fontenelle. But Michelle Foss is currently the director of stewardship and research at Fontenelle. And we're also lucky to have her as a new member of the Audubon Society board. She's a very busy person. She's the president of the Green Bellevue. And she advises the Nebraska Prescribed Fire Council. She has degrees both in environmental science and project management. And she also has some financial experience, which we're planning on exploiting pretty heavily here. She's got a really good background. I think one thing I think, and I know that she loves, is she is a scoutmaster for the Boy Scouts of America troop in Bellevue. She describes herself as a non-birder, and I can't say I've ever been out birding with her, so I don't know that I'm going to comment on that one way or the other. I was a non-birder about 6 years ago too. So she is a perfect person to be on the ASO board. And her topic tonight is she's going to describe her experience with prairie restoration out at Fontenelle Forest, which is pretty extensive. We might get her to talk a little bit about what's coming up for her because she's got a pretty good challenge coming up as well. So without any further ado, I would like to make sure everybody utilizes the chat room. So mute yourself so you don't get the barking dogs and that kind of thing in the background. But so this is Michelle Foss, and we will really looking forward to hearing your talk. Thanks, Michelle.
Thanks, Bob. Hi, everyone. As Bob said, I'm Michelle Foss. I was supposed to speak in April, but we got canceled due to COVID. So I'm very excited to be back. It gave me some time to take some new pictures to put in the slideshow. Some of you have seen some of these slides before and have heard me talk about our restoration. I change it up every time, so I promise it won't be the exact same. One of the benefits of Zoom is that I can switch over to a different screen and I can play videos or we can look at the web. So it's a little more interactive in that sense, but I really do miss speaking in person. So to start, Fontenelle Forest is 100 acres of land. It encompasses floodplains and riverine valley and ditches and roads and forests and woodlands and savanna and prairie. So we have a lot of different systems. We also have several very unique, very niche systems. We have seeps at the bottoms of the Les Hills, which are fascinating little springs that are tiny little ecosystems unto themselves. So my job right now is mostly the administrative part. I work with a team of awesome biologists and rangers who get to go outside and get to do the work. And the joke is that I sit in the office and I do the paperwork so that they get to go play outside. That being said, I do get to go outside occasionally. So think back 1,000 years or so, back to pre-settlement. And the picture on the screen, the one in the top corner, shows an artist's rendition of what the area would have looked like. You may notice there are very, very few trees. And that's because this area was known for its prairies and the floodplains. So back behind that bluff there was probably some forested area, but by and large, this area would have been pretty open. The picture in the bottom corner is an artist's drawing of the city, or excuse me, the settlement of Bellevue, back when it was a trading post. This is actually on Fontenelle Forest property. So you can see that there's trees in the background there as you go up through the hollows, and typically on north facing and some of the east facing slopes where the soil would have been more wet, but it's still pretty open. So these are some of the things that we use as what we call references. That is the last sustainable systems that this area would have had. All habitat restoration has to start with a reference, because if you don't know where you're starting, you don't know what you're trying to go for. More recently, we have photographs also on Fontenelle Forest property. So both of these areas are out off of the boardwalk. The big picture on the right, that is the Constitution tree off the third loop. And the picture on the left actually would have been closer to the second loop of the boardwalk. That is off an old trail called Riverview Trail. And you'll notice that it's not as open as before, but it's still pretty open. Both of these photographs were taken in the early 1920s. If you've been to Fontenelle Forest, between 5 years ago and 30 years ago, you would have seen a wall of trees where you see grass in both of these pictures. And that is because due to lack of fire and grazers, all of the trees that used to grow on the slopes took advantage of the open sunlight and moved into these upper areas. The problem with that is that we lost the grasses and the flowers and our oak trees. So this is a picture that was taken back in 2014 or 2015 before we started our major restoration efforts. It's very shade tolerant, so you have a lot of fast growing trees like hackberry and ironwood and some lindens. What we're finding is that we do not have the younger hickory trees and oak trees. We have seen a huge invasion by exotic plants. So we call them invasives. That means that they are non-native and they harm the system. The broader definition of invasion by exotic plants has to create an economic hardship, and that is the definition tended to be used by regulatory agencies. And that's primarily for agriculture and for timber sales. What we're finding is that our invaders that are hurting the oak-dominated systems are not necessarily the ones that are in the ag fields or in commercial forests, but they're just as detrimental to the livelihood of the land. As I mentioned, we're seeing a lack of regeneration of oak trees and the grasses and the flowers that are typically associated with them. This means that there are also fewer different types of birds and insects and even mammals. So, and the starred line there is that we lack diversity at all levels of the system. Not only the levels of life, but also the literal levels in the forest. So if you look at the bottom of that picture, most of the plants look the same. And if you look at the middle of the picture, it looks pretty much the same. So we've got a lot of sameness everywhere. So in 2015, Fontenelle Forest, in partnership with Audubon Society of Omaha, Green Bellevue, Pheasants Forever, and the Nebraska Environmental Trust, along with several private donors, Nebraska Game and Parks Commission, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, started our big Save the Oaks restoration. Why? Well, we've noticed that there was some pretty severe soil erosion. We have a very, very unique soil here called lush soil, and it's windblown. It is very fine and powdery like flour. It's also highly erodible. So when you don't have the proper mix of plants to hang on to that soil, you lose it. So by restoring the system, we have less soil erosion. We increase our diversity. not just in plants, but also in the animals. We can increase the soil organic matter, which means the plants that live there can grow better and can withstand things like drought and flood and fire and insects a lot better. We'll have an increase in the native fungi, which is an integral part of how plants interact with soil. And we have increased ecosystem services. Now, this is a favorite buzzword for ecologists and economists, oh my goodness, all at the same time, because that is a way to put a dollar value on nature, which is not easy to do. So ecosystem services include water quality. The water filtration through the plants helps clean it. It includes shade, so lower heating costs in the area. It increases the availability of animals to look at, and it's just more pleasant to be around. As well, we'll be able to more effectively control our invasive plants, and primarily through prescribed fire, in our case, we'll have more native regeneration, which makes for a more resilient system. We'll be able to open up our canopy in our woodlands and on our hilltops. And what that does is it allows for better breezes and fewer mosquitoes. We are also finding that researchers have seen that when prescribed fire is applied, the tick populations tend to be lower as well. We're also finding more different habitats. So how do we do this? Well, one of my least favorite ways is literally pulling weeds. So in that picture with the purple flowers on it, that is a pile of invasive dame's rocket. So the dame's rocket is a flower that takes over and shades out anything on the ground below it. It also outcompetes anything else in the area. That tree picture is not Hackensport, that's basil bark painting. So that tree is a tree of heaven, or ailanthus, which smells terrible and is very prolific. One of the really awful things about this tree is that when it is cut down, it resprouts. There was a study that showed one tree, when it was cut down, could send a stump runner a mile away. So if I cut down a tree here at Fontenelle Forest, it might pop up in somebody's backyard in Bellevue. So we don't want to do that. So the most effective way to control this is to kill it without the tree knowing that it's dying. So we paint herbicide on the outside of the very thin bark so it's absorbed by the tree. That kills it more slowly, and it doesn't always work the first time, but that way it doesn't send out the stump runners. The bottom picture is also another way that we combat some invasives. This is brush cutting sweet clover. Now, this particular picture was taken at Neil Woods, and we have some really pretty gross stands of sweet clover some years. Sweet clover is actually an agricultural product, but it can decimate a native system. So the most effective way to handle this is cutting it multiple times. The other really big part and the other really time-consuming and physical part is thinning. Essentially, we have too many trees. So how do we get rid of too many trees? Well, we use chainsaws. We do hack and squirt, where it still leaves some trees dead standing. We use a special mower to mow down brush, and we use brush cutters to get some of those shrubs, such as honeysuckle and autumn olive. In conjunction with thinning, we often have to use targeted herbicide. Otherwise, they just re-sprout and come back. And prescribed fire. So prescribed fire is one of the most cost-effective methods because once you already have the training and all the supplies, you can implement it relatively inexpensively, and you can apply it over a wide area in a short amount of time.
Burning settlers unit. Say that again.
That is
Woo! Oh, getting some heat on the slope. That's the vibe.
That was one of our first burn seasons, and we're really, really excited because we couldn't get fire to carry. You can see at the end of this video where the fire isn't consuming everything, it's just kind of hit or miss. And that's what we want. The fires that you see out west, the wildfires, those don't have the same ecological benefits. And part of the reason they're so intense is because they don't have the prescribed fire. When you get that buildup of explosive fuels, that's when you end up with the catastrophic fires. It may look like we have a lot of fuel here, but even that dead tree in the middle of the frame, it didn't catch fire. And that's because these fires aren't really all that hot in the grand scheme of fires. Again, that's okay. We use the fire to help recycle the nutrients into the soil, and we target hitting the invasives, which try to sprout early or stay green late, and some of the excess trees that are up in our savanna and prairie areas. So our fire program has come a long way. Back in 1998, we had our very first prescribed fire here at Fontenelle Forest. It was up off of Hawthorne Trail. And shortly after that, our fire program stalled. So we realized that we didn't have all of the proper training that we needed. We didn't have the support. We didn't have all the gear. And we didn't have the backing of the community yet. Fast forward to 2015, after a year of discussions with the fire department, a grant from NET, lots of community support, a lot of training, and a lot of preparation, we were able to implement a comprehensive prescribed fire program. That first year, we didn't burn as much as we had hoped. Now we burn almost 900 acres annually on Fontenelle property, and we have burned about 15,000 acres, or have assisted in that many acres for partners and on training exchanges. So fire is not something we take lightly, and it's something that we're constantly training and working on. In fact, right now, one of our biologists is on a wildfire assignment. So we have 3 people on staff who are actually on wildfire crews and do wildfire suppression. This is very timely. Isn't fire bad for the land? So there are some negative impacts even when we do controlled and prescribed fire. Sometimes there are short-term impacts depending on time of year and the habitat. We have had some fires where we have a lot of things burned. We have also had some fires where very little has happened. There is some loss of insects in some of our units depending on season. So we have to balance any short-term negative impacts with the long-term positive impacts for the fire-adapted system. So all these patches in the picture that aren't burned, we call that refugia. Those are areas where the insects and other invertebrates or hibernating animals beneath the soil, those aren't bothered at all by those areas that aren't burned. This allows fire to be a tool that can be used without decimating entire populations in an area. We also do prescribe fire at different times of the year, even in the same unit. Different timing has different objectives. For example, in a video I'll show later, we burned the Cumming City Cemetery in May because our goal was to hit the brome and other cool season grasses to promote more flowers and more warm season grasses to support a better system and a more native prairie system. Most of our fires are pretty low intensity. Sometimes our grass fires look really exciting and really hot and really fast, but when it's all said and done, there's still patchiness. So part of all of our restoration is monitoring. It's really hard to know you're doing well if you don't have that proof. So monitoring is simply tracking the changes over time. So in this large grant proposal for NET and our other partners, we embarked upon 3 major formal monitoring projects. We did vegetation surveys, we did breeding bird surveys, and we also did insects. So because we don't have enough data points within our small-ish area of land, we only have about 1,000 acres of woods. We had to establish our reference point, or excuse me, establish what we had over a couple of years. So we needed to find out what we did have and compare that with what we should have. We anticipate doing a recheck 10 years from the end of our first 3-year cycle of data gathering. So we have another 6 years to go before we redo the exact same thing in the exact same areas. So then we'll see, okay, what changed? And if things did change, is that what we expected? Some of our survey areas are in areas where we are doing no restoration work. Some of them are in areas where we're doing a lot of restoration work. We actually did see some changes in the vegetation survey between the first year and the 3rd year. So what do we do with that information? Well, we adapt. If what we're doing isn't working, we fix it. We try new things, we take what did work and we adjust it. We try to figure out why it didn't work, and we do more research. We look at what other people have done. We invite people to come look at what we've done. So this is actually one of our vegetation transects. This is out on the 3rd loop, and this had the highest floristic quality index. All that means is that this had the highest quality plants and the highest diversity of plants out of all of our areas. This is not surprising because the 3rd loop has seen the most work. Before we started our restoration, we had mowed the area and we had already done some significant thinning over the 20 years before that. It had also seen 1 prescribed fire before our 2015 season. We also did a breeding bird survey, and this is where I found I am definitely not a birder. So before anybody panics, I didn't do any of the surveys. I just input the data. We hired a couple of people to go to each of these points and do point transects. So they would identify the birds in 5 minutes that they could see or hear to species and male and female if possible. And this was repeated both down here at Fontenelle Forest, which this map is of, and also at Neilwood. These surveys were done also over 3 years, and the data has been input. It has not been statistically analyzed yet, but we can tell you what the perceived total abundance of various species are. I'm not a bird nerd, but I am definitely a graph person. So using Excel, we put in the total abundance of all of the birds over the 3 seasons, and you can see that the highest abundance are house wrens. While this isn't bad in and of itself, house wrens are very generalist and they'll live anywhere. So that tells us nothing about our system other than birds who can live anywhere like it. One of the things that we anticipate seeing a change in over the 10-year period is the number of species we see. We fully expect our species list to grow and the abundance of some of these generalists to lessen, and some of the more specialist birds, especially the prairie birds, will increase. One of the exciting stories that I have as far as birds go is back when I was a biologist, Matt Miller and I were out at Neil Woods, and I heard this weird bug. And I was like, Matt, what's that bug? Like, I don't know. So that's not a bug, that's a bird. What is it? Like, that's a bird we haven't heard here in years. Turns out I found a dick sizzle, and we were so excited. We rushed back to tell Rick, and he flew right up there and was like, I think you guys are crazy. I don't hear it. So he finally heard it. We were really excited. Now, this doesn't sound that exciting until you realize that it is a very specialist bird and it needs prairie. So what that tells us is that the clearing we have done up at Neil Woods so far is working. We're starting to see the prairie birds come use it again. My favorite survey out of all of 3 of the types we did was the insects. Now, we already had over 500 species of documented insects. We now have just under 1,000. Tony Palmer, who used to work for the Henry Dorley Zoo and Fontenelle Forest, had moved to Arizona and graciously came back to do our insect survey. So he did a combination of walking transects, where he would walk a line and identify whatever he could see. They did some drop buckets to catch some of the beetles. And they also did night trapping. And that's where they went out at night with big white sheets and bright lights and checked out all the insects that came to visit. Some of the other monitoring that we've done since, that's more informal, is we've done an informal plant survey. We currently have a volunteer who is determined to see every flowering Nebraska plant in the state. And he has spent a lot of time at Fontenelle Forest and Neil Woods looking for any plant that might possibly be here. So he's found a couple of cool ones. We have butterfly surveys going on. We are in our 3rd year of annual butterfly survey. So Joanne Langeby and Holly Hoffreiter have spent the last 3 summers walking the same trails, looking for, identifying, and counting butterflies. They do this from usually early to mid-April, all the way through October, and every week. So it's really neat to see the variation in butterflies that they have found and try to correlate that sometimes with weather and sometimes with plant communities. There is also a deer survey going on. So we have a grad student who is trying to use trail cameras to do deer surveys. We have had that research done on the floodplain for 25 years now, I believe. Currently, Dr. Jeremy White is the one conducting it, and that will be continuing when it's not flooded and they can access it. They do go down there. They have also studied some bats up at Neil Woods to compare with Turkey Creek, which is a piece of land up north that is now run by UNO. In the future, we're looking at doing fungal surveys, and we're looking at fish and invertebrates in the wetlands. So this will help us to see how the health of our wetlands is. Education and outreach is a huge part of what we do. We embed all of the restoration into our education programs and as many of our family programs as we can. We attend community meetings and speak at them. We have spoken at and attended conferences and seminars, both locally and regionally, and various people on our staff hold advisory positions. Like Bob mentioned, I'm an advisor on the Nebraska Prescribed Fire Council, We also hold a position with the Los Hills Fire Partners. Currently, I am also chairing the Community Forest Plan, which is a new initiative in Omaha. So I want to share a video with you guys now. That is one of our outreach videos. So part of our grant is to explain what we're doing to other people. And one of the ways we did that is by producing some videos. And Alex Wiles, who now works with Nebraska Game and Parks, helped us come up with a series of 6 videos. Here is the second video from that series.
I think there's 2 things that we think about before we burn. One, the land really needs and can utilize some fire, and 2, we have the ability to efficiently work in that area. Different ecological communities developed around fires and so became dependent on fire to be able to function and to be able to maintain the level of species richness and diversity that were here, like say when some of the first early European explorers saw this place and saw how diverse and rich it was. Those communities would have experienced fire on an almost annual basis. The Native Americans that lived here, both historically and the prehistoric people that lived here, would have had fire and used fire to their benefit, and they did that to attract grazers as well as to maybe help with some of their agriculture and things like that. We identify an area that we want to burn, then we identify the most efficient and effective fire break locations. We get that mapped, and then we do what's called building our fire break. We go in and use chainsaws, hand tools, maybe a tractor with a mower, and we're trying to get things to look essentially like our hiking trails here at Fontenelle Forest. In other words, kind of a leveled out area free of tree stumps, sticks, excessive vegetation, so that when November comes, we can come back with leaf blowers and blow it down to just maybe some mowed short grass. That way, if fire does come, or when we do light along that line, we can easily maintain it because that fire line or fire break, if you will, is free of fuel. So we try to build our fire breaks as good as possible and pay particular attention to this, what we call urban interface, where the homes and businesses approach the forest boundary. Public safety is number 1 to us, so we want to keep residents safe that live near our woods. We want to keep hikers that come and visit us safe, and we want to keep our crew safe. We utilize tools that are used by wildland firefighters that are also doing suppression. So we use what the suppression people call a backfire torch. It's also called a drip torch. It's an aluminum cylinder with a tube and a wick at the end of that tube, and that tube drops fuel onto the wick, which is lit, which then drops a little bit of flaming fuel down onto the areas that we're trying to light. We have what's called a bladder bag. Essentially, it's a backpack with a plastic liner with water and then a brass hand pump. They work really effectively, and the beauty with a bladder bag is it's soft-sided, so it conforms to your body, so we're able to maneuver up and down the hills even though we might be carrying 30 or 40 pounds of water on our back. I think the thing to remember with fire is it's a natural process that's been on this landscape. So really the reason we burn is not to accomplish any particular goal or list of goals, but what we do is just provide the landscape what it's adapted with so that it can function the way it was designed to.
So that was Jim Beebe. He is our Fontenelle Forest head ranger, and he is our primary burn boss. He has the most experience, and he has been here the longest. He is not one of the ones who is on a wildland fire crew. That is Matt, Michaela, and Reese. Matt and Michaela are our biologists, and Reese is our Neolith ranger. So I like outreach. As Bob said, I was also an educator. I did school programs. I did some community programs. I had done Raptor programs. I like talking. So I like going out and interacting with people. I like explaining what we do, and I like hearing what other people do. So one of the ways that we incorporate that into our work is making it part of our work. So we go out and we're on boards of other organizations. We have community involvement. So even if we're not on boards, we go out and we do things with other groups. I know some of our staff are involved with the Green Omaha Coalition, Pheasants Forever, Ducks Unlimited. We go out and we do things in the community outside of our immediate boundaries. We also write blog posts. If you go to our website, you can see some of the things that we wrote in the first couple of years of our grant, basics about what we do, why and how. And we're also starting to update some of those. We just wrote one about the butterfly surveys, and we have done some video blogs over when the Nature Center was closed. We do presentations and talks, like this one. We go out and we speak to university groups and classes. We also go to other community areas. I went and talked to the Ponca Hills Preservation Association, which doesn't necessarily sound like a good match, but one of the benefits of Ponca Hills is that unique system. So we do neighbor visits and land assessments. I have hiked through Fontenelle Forest and ended up in neighbors' backyards because they wanted to know what they had and if there was anything that could hurt the forest. So these individual one-on-one outreach sessions. We recently went out and visited with the owners of Jensen Gardens, and we were able to do a burn on their land because they wanted to create a healthier system. We also push things out on social media. So I have another video I wanted to share with you guys. Bob actually requested this one. It's about the Cumming City Cemetery burn. And this is an example of some of the outreach we were doing when the Nature Center was closed in order to keep people engaged.
Hi, and welcome to Wednesdays in the Woods. I'm Michelle Foss, Manager of Stewardship and Research at Fontenelle Forest. Today, we're going to talk about growing season burns and prairie management. In our partnership with Audubon Society of Omaha, we have the opportunity to help with land management, which includes prescribed fire. Today, we're doing a prescribed fire at the Cumming City Cemetery, which is a remnant prairie just north of Blair, Nebraska. Some of the biggest threats to prairies right now, besides human development, is tree and shrub encroachment. This area had a lot of trees and shrubs in it. So, in partnership with Audubon Society of Omaha, we were able to cut some of these down. Prescribed fire will help to prevent more trees and shrubs from coming in and will help to kill resprouts that appear from what we've already cut. Recently, the UNO Audubon Student Conservation Chapter had a work day here. This remnant is also battling an invasion of brome grass. There is hope, however. Spring burns after green up help to combat the brome. There are also remnant native plants in here. This complex native system is fire adapted. The brome is not, which is why prescribed fire works. And it is an important aspect of the prairie system. We're beginning to burn in the corner, and we will wrap around the entire unit, taking fire with us as we go. The fire primarily burns the duff layer underneath the green. This is the first time in over 10 years this prairie has seen fire. Future management plans include continued shrub and brush removal, invasive plant management, and more prescribed fire. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next Wednesday.
For a while there, I was doing one of those short videos every week. So it was a little tough to always come up with something to talk about, but we were able to pull off 4 different fires in that time period. So we were able to do a couple of videos about that. We also did videos about the rest of our restoration as well, and also some about our trails too. So if you are ever bored and want to know what people have been up to here at Fontenelle Forest, we do have a YouTube channel where all of our social media videos from land stewardship, from the animal care side, and also from education, they're all on there. So what's our long-term vision? Nobody sets out working in land management and expecting things to wrap up within their own lifetime. So what do? We need to find hope other places. So some of our examples who are ahead of us in the restoration game include Indian Cave State Park, Hitchcock Nature Center, and Timber Hill Oak Savanna, which is a private piece of land that is owned by some people who realized they had something pretty unique. They implemented prescribed fire and did some thinning, and they have one of the best examples of a functioning oak savanna in the area. So Indian Cave State Park and Hitchcock Nature Center are both areas that we have visited frequently, and we have leaned on repeatedly for help, both technical and actual people coming to help us burn and do thinning projects. So with their support and their help, we've been able to get our program going, and we've been able to jump in front of them in some instances. We have 3 work sites actually, where we have done significant thinning. We have cleared all of the trees in the area and all of the invasive shrubs, and we are resetting it back to the prairie. One of our areas, the Hilltop Prairie, is primarily sponsored by ASO. So they gave us the money to treat it with herbicide, to do significant thinning, and then to apply repeated fire, as well as seed it. We have thrown seed out on our Hilltop area twice now, and we're looking at a 3rd. We have also recently, with money from Game and Parks and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, cleared areas along our history trail at Fontenelle Forest and along Neal Trail up at Neal Woods to get rid of the invasive shrubs and trees and plant back to prairie. That is not something that Nebraska Game and Parks can do on their own land as easily because of competing interests. And same with Hitchcock Nature Center, because they have other things going on, they can't always do those intensive projects that we have the flexibility to do. So what's coming up? We are beginning planning for floodplain restoration. Now, we're not abandoning the oak woodlands and savannas and prairies. We are focusing our intensive restoration on a new area. So we are working on an assessment of what we have and funding and planning for work in our floodplains. Over half of our land is floodplain, both at Fontenelle Forest here in Bellevue and at Neal Woods up in North Omaha. There's a lot of floodplain property. It's been impacted pretty severely over the last 2 major floods, as well as countless minor floods. Our Hidden Lake Trail has been underwater in areas since the late summer of 2018. So the hydrology changes in the floodplain, and that is not something that our floodplains are able to handle. So we are looking to create a more resilient, healthy system down there as well. We're looking at targeted invasive control and prescribed fire on a very small scale to start. We are looking at setting up monitoring like we have in the uplands and getting that going. And we are looking at specifying projects and phase definitions. So with this transition of intensive restoration from the uplands to the floodplain, there's a steep learning curve. So we are taking what we already know and we are looking at how can we apply that to the floodplain? What do we need to do? Who do we need to talk to? What's coming up that we need to be ready for? So we're taking the next few months and we are working up a large land management plan for the wetlands and the floodplain. And we are going to start planning significant work down there while we're still maintaining our uplands. How do we do that? We do it with partners. Nature doesn't understand geopolitical boundaries, so when it comes to restoration, we can't either. Well, we can and we have to, but we can work beyond those boundaries through partners and with other people. This list is just a very quick list of those who have helped both with the upland restoration and have started to help us with some of our floodplain restoration. We have a lot of different groups involved, from actual set groups like Audubon Society and Green Bellevue to a loose group of people that is working on the community forest plan. We also work with researchers, the Army Corps of Engineers, which has been new for me. On top of our habitat restoration, we are also working on trail infrastructure rebuilding. We have a damaged bird blind, the boardwalk was destroyed, and our bridge was moved in the last flood. So we are trying to put it all together strategically to make all of this work together in a long-term way that benefits everybody. So we pull in people from Iowa, we have people from here in Nebraska, we have contacts in Minnesota, we have people in Wisconsin. We're talking to everybody and anybody that we can. We're doing the research just like we did with our uplands restoration. So we've got a lot going on, we've got a lot to do. Like I said, we don't do it alone. These are all pictures of partner areas. So the top left, that is a partner burn that we helped with for Pheasants Forever out in Linwood. We went out and we helped with a small burn, but it was a training burn and it was a growing season workshop. So this picture, you can see most of the unit that we've burned. The picture below it is a cool picture, I think, from Cumming City Cemetery, where you can see the cemetery and you can see where we've burned. There's a green line where we put in our fire break so that we didn't burn down the pine trees and we didn't burn down the fence. You can also see that outside of that perimeter, not all of the grass burned, so we still have that patchiness. This big picture on the right is the Missouri River, and that is up at Neal Woods on land that we recently acquired through a partnership with Ducks Unlimited and Back to the River. So one of the objectives of a lot of the Missouri River corridor habitat managers is to protect all of the land in the corridor for habitat. And one way that that has happened is that organizations have gotten together to purchase land and either put it into conservation easements or donate it to organizations that work on conservation. So we recently acquired property just north of our Neal Woods floodplain that does just that. So there is now only a small bit of land in between what is owned by Fontenelle Forest and what is owned by DeSoto National Wildlife Refuge in the North Omaha area. So it's kind of exciting to think about all of the different groups of people, from individuals who want to see habitat restored in their own yards to the United States Army Corps of Engineers, who controls the river level and would like to see functioning habitats up and down the river as well. We can't do any of our work without the support and understanding of everybody involved. The on-the-ground management, the lighting of the fire, and then the staying with it, the cutting down of the trees, the brush piling, the seeding, that's only one part of the restoration puzzle. We need the support of the community, of our neighbors, and everybody really. This land may be owned by Fontenelle Forest, but it's a part of the larger picture. It is a part of the greater Omaha area. It is a part of the Missouri River corridor. It is a small part of the Great Plains of the United States of America. And it's a teeny tiny little, but very important part of the world's ecosystems. We're in the Central Flyway. We have a unique position to support huge numbers of migratory birds as well as other animals. We're also in a unique position to support both eastern and western species of various plants and animals. We're also in the border of northern and southern habitat. So we see a lot of crossover and we see a lot of interesting things here in eastern Nebraska. So what do? You ask questions. Why do we do these things? How can you help? What else needs to be done? I don't think you're doing that right. How did you come up with that solution? Keep asking questions. Do your own research. And most importantly, tell other people. And if you don't know what to say, you can refer them to other areas. There's our website. Game and Parks has phenomenal information on the habitats of Nebraska. There's people all over that have information and that want to share it. But it doesn't do any good unless people are excited about it. One of my favorite things to do is to talk to people who have land. And if that's your backyard, if that is a potted plant on your balcony, you have a little piece of earth that you're cultivating. So make that little piece of earth the best you can. When I would talk to kids, I would do some after-school programs. I remember a kindergarten class, and this one little girl just had her little bean plant that they had grown in class, and she was really upset that she didn't have a place to put it. So I asked her, well, do you have a bigger container? Well, yes. Cool. Put it in a bigger container. Can you grow the plant bigger? How can you make the plant healthy and happy? What else grows with your plant? And she got really excited about all these things she could do with this little bean plant. Now, I'll be the first to admit I can't keep a house plant, so I have no idea if I should even be telling people about house plants. But that ownership of land and that ownership of nature and that feeling of belonging, that's for everybody. Whether you have a place to call your own or you're in a park or whatever, we are all part of nature. And the ability for us as humans to appreciate that and understand that we are a part of it is pretty exciting. And I get really excited about telling people about it. And I am particular to certain ecosystems, but if you would rather find out more about the ocean, do it. Find out more information. It's a great way to learn things and to just foster that love of the natural world. So now that I have talked at you for a really long time, what questions do you guys have?
Well, Michelle, I have one question. It's
Okay.
coming from me. Is it true that Dane's rocket makes a wonderful salad?
It does. So one of the reasons Dame's rocket is here, it was actually introduced from Europe, is that it was a salad green as well as a flower. So it's an escaped cultivar. Garlic mustard is another one. So yep, both edible and yeah.
Well, you don't allow the people that volunteer at land stewardship to take it home in bushel baskets, do you?
Honestly, I've never had anybody ask, Bob.
Okay, that's not fair. I would encourage you guys to ask Michelle questions because she has a lot of answers, I have to admit. I have to interject here before if we get into some others, that working with Fontenelle Forest land management has been a truly wonderful partnership for my 5 years on the board. They will work with us on a lot of the projects. Sometimes when you look at a project like Cummings Cemetery, when you first saw it, it was pretty much overgrown. There really is a cemetery up on top of the hill there. For those of you that are on the board here, and I noticed several of you, it's a good birding place to take a look. And there really is a cemetery there that has graves from the 1840s. And of course, we're told that here, down in Bellevue, that Bellevue is the oldest place in Nebraska. And it was about 1845. So there were some people up north of Bellaire up there, and it was an incorporated town at one point. So if you haven't been up there, go up there. It looks a whole lot better now than when we first got it. And I'll put in a plug for the UNO campus chapter, Audubon chapter. They did do a lot of work out there, and Michelle made them work. So that it worked out really, really well. Strong bodies. That's what we're going to use for the seed sale as well. So if anybody has any questions, you can put them into the chat, and I will ask Michelle. Let me see here. I'll wait for it. But I really appreciate Michelle's being the inaugural person here for Zoom, because it looks like we're going to have to do this for a while. I don't think we're going to be able to get a bunch of people into the Barb Whites for quite a while for our monthly program.
Well, I have a question for everybody. Why are you here today? What made you interested in the restoration we're doing at Fontenelle Forest?
Oh, Heidi's got a question here. Let me see if I can sort it out here. Okay. Oh, well Heidi comes from, and her son come from this discipline. Any other good bird stories from being out in the field?
Yeah. So Matt, one of our biologists, we started at the same time. We both started in education. And since day one, he's been trying to get me to hear and see birds. So I have improved significantly. I couldn't ever see birds before, and now occasionally I see them. But there was one day that he had told Rick Schmidt, who used to work here, that I was hopeless. So Rick, silly Rick, put out the invitation for anybody to go birding. I was like, cool, I'll go. And when I was the only person who showed up, he was just like, oh no. So we were walking down Mormon Hollow, and I was like, that's a weird bird. What is that? He's like, where? I don't see it. It's right there. It's kind of big, but not really. It's brown. Like, really? Yeah. So we stopped and we looked, and he's like, I can't believe you saw that. You just saw an ovenbird. I'm like, okay. He goes, no, that's kind of exciting. He's like, oh, all right, that's great. So yeah, I tend to frustrate birders, so I promise I won't come run any of your birding.
Well, Rick Schmidt is a pretty hard person. He walks around and points at birds a lot by hearing them. He doesn't really even see them. He just hears them.
Yeah, I didn't know that at the time, so that made more sense when he explained that too.
Yeah, he's been that way for years. Well, I don't have any more questions. If anybody has one, we'll give you a couple more minutes here. But I really like to thank Michelle. This is a really good talk. I was really appreciative to hear, partly from talking with her earlier today, but partly in the program about what she's got planned. They have some real challenges down in the floodplain down So, and she's got a good beat on it. It looks like we're getting a couple questions here from Scott, Scott Bradley. Oh, let's see. Yeah, he's just complimenting on your great presentation. Let's see, from Patrick Swanson.
Thanks.
Is there a vision for extending the protected river corridor north to south from Fontenelle?
That's an excellent question. So a lot of the riverfront is protected in one way or another, or owned throughout Omaha. So we own quite a bit down here in the Bellevue area. And then part of Gifford Point is also owned and run by Nebraska Game and Parks Commission, and then Gifford Farms. So it's protected in a sense down here from development. And then north from our boundary to Omaha is private landowners. If the opportunity comes up, I don't know that we would necessarily say no, but we are not, our goal as an organization is not land acquisition necessarily. We have a team of 5 full-time people to manage the 2,100 acres we have. So we're pretty well at our capacity to do a decent job. But that's not to say that it's out of the question that we would get more land. There are some organizations like Back to the River, who that is one of their main goals, is to ensure protection of the Missouri River corridor. I know also on the Iowa side, things are being looked at that way as well. There are organizations whose goal is to protect that area. Especially after the most recent flood, it's more important. Did that answer your question, kind of?
I think so, yeah. For those of you who concentrate on Fontenelle Forest, the southern Fontenelle Forest property, it's pretty well known, although there are some pretty wild and woolly areas that people don't get to very often, except for land stewardship. But I would encourage you to get up to Neil Woods if you can, because these guys, the land stewardship folks, have done a really wonderful job up there. That's a big underdeveloped area that doesn't have a lot of the bells and whistles that Fontenelle Forest has, but it's a wonderful environment. And if you are a birder, it's a great place to go birding, and it's fairly accessible. Now, that being said, you go up there to walk. You don't go up there to come out and bug me in the raptor exhibit. It's a place where you go to take a hike, and more often than not, you'll find something out there. And the areas that these guys have restored up there are really quite spectacular. So if you're burned out on or looking for a place to take a hike, drive up to oh yeah, here's a question from Mary. She wants to know if the Kremlowski track is accessible now.
Excellent question. So just this last week, Reese was able to open up part of an old trail. So we sustained significant damage on the Kremlowski tracks. The water didn't recede until January of this year. We still had pockets in March. And what was left were 4 and 5 foot high piles of 2 foot to 6 foot diameter logs just dumped. So in order to get our floodplain trails back, we're going to have to get some heavy equipment out there. But we found a culvert that had been put underneath a road when it was being prepped for a camp for the Seventh-day Adventists. And we put a line along the bluffs for a trail that crosses that culvert, and there is now the river overlook that used to be part of the Missouri River Ecology Trail. That part is back. So as we get more time in the winter, our primary goal is the Fontenelle floodplain, and then when we can, we'll head up to Neil Woods and try to reclaim some more trail back up there.
You know, for those of you that aren't really as familiar with Neil Woods, as you're aware, the Primlowski acquisition was a fairly relatively recent one, probably within the last 4 or 5 years, Michelle, somewhere in that.
Longer than that, because we've had it longer than I've been here.
And it's an interesting area because when you think of Neil Woods, you think about what I was talking about with up, hills and hollows and that kind of thing. But this is a plot that is across the river road, and it borders the Missouri River, which is the problem with it right now is that it floods miserably. You don't see very much of it without the water around it. It has an interesting group of birds. There is a pair of pileated woodpeckers, which I'm sure Mary and Scott Bradley have seen on their trips up there. So it's a different, a little bit different bird list in and out of time, but it's a really good place to head up and bird. So if you haven't been there and if you'd like to bird, it's a little bit tougher to bird because you're not surrounded by birds all the time, but it's a really good place to bird. And the Primlowski is really neat. I'm glad that hopefully we can get that back on the straight and narrow. The river is a little problematic though, I think. Okay.
Yeah. That trail was literally just opened, so now you can check out there. We did have damage. So the history trail that went up the hill back behind the ranger house is no longer a loop. It's an out and back now. We're working on making it a loop on the top of the hill, but we had significant erosion and that's not passable anymore that way either. I did see your question, Heidi. So when we started our prescribed fire program, we did some public programs at Fontenelle Forest where we did town hall meetings. And we did different meetings to invite people to come find out about it, ask us questions, tell us their concerns. And we really didn't have a lot of negative pushback. We had a bunch of people who were, confused, but they were intrigued more than anything. We don't get that many complaints. We are usually pretty good about letting our immediate neighbors know when we're burning. We do push out notifications from Fontenelle, and I'm the one doing those, so it takes a little time. We try to do it on our social media, and I let homeowners associations know. Most people just don't seem to have a huge problem with it. We have one person who constantly comments on our social media when we're burning about how horrible it is and how she doesn't like it, and we just nod our heads and carry on. But for the most part, people don't seem to have an issue with it. They get annoyed because we've closed trails, but we open our trails as soon as possible. And this year when we burn at the Nature Center, the boardwalk is staying open so people can actually be out there while we're burning. So we're pretty excited about that. We get to show off, and people who are interested can come out while we're burning. Normally it's kind of a safety hazard because the trails are our access in and out, and we need to know where people are. So we do close trails when we're burning, just for safety and that kind of thing. I don't know if people understand that we do it more for ecological needs. I have people who are very excited that we are protecting them from wildfire, which is not really the case. We don't have a high wildfire risk here in eastern Nebraska because we don't have the right fuels. When you have the pine trees and the other coniferous trees, that's when you have the higher fire danger because that fuel builds. And when those trees are on fire, the outside burn, or the inside heats up quicker than the outside, so they tend to explode and catch fire up top. What we deal with here are primarily ground fuels. We're burning the sticks and the logs on the ground, we're burning the leaves, the grasses. Sometimes we get a couple of dead trees or hollow trees to ignite, but we don't usually have the fire in the sky that you see. We do sometimes, and we have left trails closed when there's any chance of danger or trees falling. But we also know how far fire can go. So if we have a tree on fire at the top in the middle of a unit where all the fuel around it is burned, we can walk away and we come back and we monitor the area until it's completely out. But we can open trails a lot faster after a burn now that we know how far away from burning logs is safe. So, and we have the full support of the fire department. And I think starting with that support was key to getting concerns to the public.
I think a lot of people don't understand that the differences in laws that govern burning between Nebraska and Iowa. I know in Iowa, all you need to do is have a tractor and you can drag a flare through your field, burn the whole thing to bits. You guys are kind of under the restrictions of the Bellevue Fire District, so you have to get along, and you have gotten along with them. I remember the day that you guys had an inadvertent fire out there. I was out at Fontenelle Forest, and I saw the rangers running around with their hair on fire, literally almost. And it was to hell and gone. I mean, it was way the most inaccessible point in Fontenelle Forest, which you managed really well. And I think that was kind of a turning point for you guys with Bellevue. They didn't turn down your burn permits very often after that. So.
Yeah, so we have to work with all the individual fire departments, and we have to obtain permits, and then we can get them out. So.
And Patrick Swanson asks, are you overseeding with woodland wildflower species at all?
So we primarily are doing prairie in our seedings at this point. Most of our woodland areas aren't ready yet. They're still too shady. So for a lot of our seeding, we do collect some woodland flowers. They're a little bit harder to collect, but we do it on our own property and overseed. In our areas where we've done the reconstruction, we do the woodland wildflowers, but we're finding that a lot of the species overlap with the prairie. So, and we have pockets where some of the prairie grows really well, and we have some more of the shade tolerant prairie stuff that we put in our woodlands.
Well, any more questions? I think that was the last one. Came in late. I'm glad everybody chimed in. It's always better when we explain things, when they ask specific questions. Well, I'm the next person up in October, and I'm going to try to dovetail with the seed sale and talk about bird feeding in general, and just give some advice and see if I can't stir up a little interest right before we close off the order period for this bird seed sale. I would like to really thank all of the people that on the board who've been working really, really hard. This is our 40th year of selling bird seed in Omaha twice. And so I think we're stirring up some interest. The catalog got opened early this year, and we already have, last time I heard, 15 or 16 people already ordering. So that's really good to look forward to. That's the next big thing. If you could share the on Facebook the posts that the marketing committee are making on Facebook with your friends within your friend list, that would be appreciated. I know it's done. We get a lot of interest. So with that, I'm going to let everybody go. Thank you very much, Michelle. We really appreciate you on the board and your abilities here. So thank you.
Everybody, if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to me at Fontenelle Forest. I'm pretty easy to find.
Thanks everybody for coming too.